I think what all of this is about. So, oops, this is for the last end of the session. So I'm going to actually take a moment to introduce you to our 4 speakers. And the way that we will be setting up today's session will be one in which each of them will tell a brief story, just for a few minutes, explaining how they have used a networks approach in their work. So we'll do kind of one by one, 4 stories in a row, fairly rapidly. Then, and I can't find Emmanuel. You said if you could find him and spotlight him for me, he's lost on my screen. Then what we will do is we will have a bit of a dialogue with all of the speakers around the topic of networks and sustainable agriculture, and see how these different approaches actually intersect with each other. After that, what we're going to do is actually pause for a moment and turn it over to you, the audience, and allow you to insert your ideas. What we have is actually, we co-created a big question, a question we want all of you to reflect around. So Yusuf is going to share it in the chat. And we're going to ask you to actually stay silent in chat after you finish introducing yourself, but reflect on the big question. And as you're listening to the speakers, start writing down what your answers might be to the big question. It could either be from your own perspective or what you're hearing from the speakers, or some sort of combination. And then at a certain point, we'll stop the speakers and we'll ask you to just start typing. So we'll ask you to press enter and start sharing your ideas around the big questions. And at that point, the speakers will actually take a few minutes to actually absorb what you're saying. And then we'll turn it back over to the speakers to continue dialogue. So the idea is, we want to not just share and hear stories, but we actually want to think about how can we amplify these stories to achieve more impact in the agricultural space. Anna, you asked me in chat, but I didn't have a chance to reply to you. What is the order? I'm just going to randomly choose people to go, I think, because we didn't have enough prep time. So is there anybody who would like to start, who'd like to volunteer to go first? Or if not, we'll just kind of choose you one by one. If there's anybody who wants to just unmute and volunteer yourself. Going 3, 2, 1. How about Nicolas? Nicolas, do you want to start us off? 4 minutes, let's hear your story.
Sure. Hi, everyone. Really a pleasure to be here. Seeing people from all over the world. I've seen Uganda, Taiwan, Jamaica, India, Nigeria. This is fabulous. This is networking. So I'm working for UNDP, the United Nations Development Program, and specifically in the food and agriculture practice. I'm an agronomist by training, and I live in Brussels, Belgium, with my wife and 2 young boys of 4 and 6 years old, if you want to know everything about me. So it's really a pleasure, and I'm really excited to benefit from the experience of my colleagues here on networks for sustainable agriculture. And so at the core of what we do, or what I do at UNDP, is the fact that you cannot change a system, a complex system, such as food system or agricultural supply chain alone. You know, it's not possible. So you need networks, and you need collaboration as kind of organizing principle for transformation, for change, for impact. Without network and collaboration, you will not succeed. So this is the starting point for the work we do. So I'm going to try to share a bit of our perspective on that. And I think when we think about stories, it's good to tell what gets in the way, not only the success, but what's also not working, so that you can improve your ways of working. So our experience is coming from 2 types of networks. We have a multi-stakeholder platform with government, private sector, civil society, farmers on sustainable agriculture. So we have like a palm oil platform in Indonesia, a cashmere platform in Mongolia, a pineapple platform in Costa Rica, or coffee in Peru. And we also have a community of practice that connects those practitioners together. And so during the past 10 years, we've learned the hard way many limiting conditions that are reflective of for us, the development sector paradigm, you know, working for a United Nations institution. So for example, donor requirements and approaches are working with predetermined outcomes and indicators. You have log frames, and 5 years in advance, you have to decide what you're going to do. But then you have COVID, then you have the war, then you have so many things that happen that you didn't think about before, but you stuck into that, framework in a project. And that's a big constraint for us. We also see, when we think about network, many silos, many conflicting interests, and many people trying to achieve the same thing, but not really connected. And the silos are also linked to many egos. There's many egos in the sector, unfortunately, which is, my project is better than yours, my methodology is better than yours, my network is better than yours, which is usually not so helpful. We've also learned that everybody's rushing to do things. There's this sense of urgency. The world is going to collapse, climate change and food systems are broken, and we're all running, doing after things. And we forget to slow down. And actually, maybe slowing down is one of the most important things we can do to go into depth of things, And also, I think two more things. There's not enough attention that is being given to power dynamics. In many networks, many multi-stakeholder processes, and we need to really be careful of who's at the table, who gets more attention, who gets more resources, etc. And so based on, I could talk for longer, but based on those learnings, we're trying to improve a few of the things we do in those platforms and community of practice. One is that at the center of all the things we do is we're trying to put trust and relationships at the center. And that sounds like, yes, of course we're going to do that, but you'll be surprised by how many processes don't put attention to trust and relationship. You go into transactional discussion, not even saying hello. That's why I said, I have 2 kids, 2 young boys, because I'm something more than a UNDP staff. I'm a whole person, and we all are. And so how do we build those trusted relationship? And for that, I think at the center for networks is facilitation. You need very strong network of facilitators that are able to create those safe space so that everybody can connect, where you can move from telling what you need to do to listening. Deep listening is essential, where we can bring process that invites the heart and not only the mind and the doing, but also the being. So that's something very important for us. And I'll finish with one thing also is about, I've said what gets in the way and what some people get wrong, donors get this wrong or this get wrong, but actually it's about that we are part of the system. The inner change is fundamental when you think about network and system transformation and collective transformation. And so I always like the analogy about, when you're really upset, you're in your car, you're in the traffic, and you're like, oh, I hate the traffic. This is so annoying. But you forget that you are part of traffic. It's because you are there in your car that there is traffic. And so it's the same with system transformation. You are part of the system. And so how do you turn the lens back on you so that we can reconnect with ourselves and others and nature? I think this is where leadership capacity is doing. And this is where what ENACT is doing, this festival, is fabulous, because we can look back on ourselves, what we need to do. So I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Nicolas. And I'm glad I asked you to go first, because I think what you shared was a very strong framing for how we can approach all of this work. And if you don't mind, if you would like to share in chat the resources that the UNDP has created around all of this and lessons learned, because I know that they're really useful and powerful, and I'm sure a lot of people would find them beneficial. So we're just gonna move to the next storyteller, and I think maybe I'll ask Patrick to share if you'd like. Your story may be similar, may be completely different, but just to give us a taste of how you're approaching this topic.
Okay. Yes, good afternoon. I'm also very pleased to be able to share some of my thoughts. But my name is Patrick. I'm also from a UN organization, FAO, Food and Agriculture Organization. And I had the big chance to be able to work on a quite innovative initiative of realizing a participatory food systems assessment as a start of a longer term process of seeking out, finding out how we would best support the transition and the transition to sustainable food systems. So in a way, this started off somewhere in 2019 already with a joint piece of work with CIRAD, with the French Institute for Agricultural Research and Development, where we tried already to build up an approach to assess food systems, based a lot based on conversations and dialogues and different steps in the process, where we would then consult stakeholders on their views and also on their interpretation and on their understanding of some of the key dynamics playing out in food systems in their country, and then moving gradually to discussing what are potential levers for change. And then we are now at the stage where we will then see how we can use those levers and the insights created on the food system dynamics to activate and to move on to more concrete support. So maybe I'll share some of these ideas to a slideshow. So we support the transition by these participatory food systems assessments. We did about 50, and it took us about 2 years to do this. Now we are at the end of this process. We were in this process facilitating a lot of stakeholder dialogues and networks and processes at multiple levels and scales. And now we are in the process of trying to build up these institutional platforms and networks that will be able to steer and monitor long-term transformation. So building up the institutional capabilities and networks that can. So maybe just to show, it's not to be to go in detail, but in a way there were lots of parties involved in this process. Now you had at one side the EU delegations that were strongly interested, both at national level and at local level, country level. You had also FAO representatives, and then of course the national authorities that were already taking, in some cases, preparing their food system dialogues. But then in each of the countries, we had to set up a small network, a core team, and then this core team was involved in broader stakeholder consultations with private sector, think tanks, and so on. So I think in every country, we mobilized more than 100 people in these dialogues and these conversations. To have a glimpse of the process, well, there was a bit of first a big picture type of process where you exploit all kind of information and you try to zoom in how the government perceives some of these challenges and political priorities. But then also at the same time, you try to understand what different other stakeholders are thinking about the food system challenges. And then gradually you move on. I mean, we had even a scoping workshop at the beginning of the process, which was already highly participative. Then you move on to finding evidence, trying to gather those insights on the dynamics of the food system, combining qualitative and quantitative data, and always discussing this with the stakeholders involved and experts. And then at the end of that, you have a big consultation event, again, where you try to zoom in and obtain shared view on these challenges and potential levers and areas where we think interventions would make sense. And then now we're at the stage of trying to set up these platforms that will be capable of steering long-term transition process. So there also you see there's a lot of workshops and participatory moments where we're still exploring a bit how we will proceed. But the end game is really to prepare and to support countries and stakeholders and actors, food system actors, in steering, let's say, and supporting the long-term transition of their food systems towards sustainability. So I'll stop sharing now, but the big challenge, I'm not keeping the time, so you have to show me if I know if I can talk as Nicolas a lot. 1 minute, okay, good. So the big challenge is, of course, how you accompany all these stakeholders in these different dialogues, and we had to do that virtually, which was a big challenge also in SE. But then it's also the landing, which is difficult, no? Because you can have lots of conversations, but at some point in time, you have to be able to synthesize all these things in something that is usable for the next step. That is a big challenge, because that document, and I can show you examples that I put the link in the chat. This is then the starting point for a new set of dialogues and conversations, where we hope that stakeholders will be more prepared understand their food system, but also to work on developing a vision of where they want to be, let's say in 15, 20 years time, and how to go about this transition and this transformation. So in a way, it's all the time in the last 2 years, trying to facilitate these conversations, networks, making synthesis out of it, questioning continuously what we were doing and how we were doing it. It's been a huge experiment, and I'm very thankful to have been able to participate in this process. Thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. And I think before I'm going to turn it over to Anna next, because Anna, I think, provides a different lens than Patrick and Nicolas in terms of how to kind of approach the food transformation, let's say. So it'll be interesting to compare. Before I do that, Yusuf, if I could ask, because a few people have signed on since Nicolas and Patrick started, if you could reshare the prompt. And just a reminder to everybody who is listening, we're asking you to not just listen, not just be passive observers, but to participate in the process. We are, one thing that we'll be doing after we do the round of speakers is asking for everyone to contribute through chat a round of reflections on this broader question. So listen carefully to what you're hearing, but also reflect on your own experiences. We want to think about how can networks really be leveraged to create a more diverse playing field and shift agricultural narratives and systems. It's kind of a mouthful question, but that's what we want to think about. Anna, share us Slow Food's experience.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you here today. Nicolas, I also have a son, 7-year-old. I have some Hot Wheels sitting next to me here, which is familiar probably to many of you. So my name is Anna Moulet. I use she, her pronouns. I am the executive director of Slow Food. And Slow Food, maybe some of you know, is an international grassroots volunteer-driven network. And our overall vision is good, clean, and fair food for all. So we start with the food, and from food, we can get to so many different conversations around agriculture and our food systems. So in the US, we have about 80 chapters and like about a dozen thematic working groups. And each group kind of picks the topic that is most relevant locally. So some work deeply with chefs, some focus on school gardens, some on sustainable fishing. It really depends on the leadership and on the local needs. So I wanted to share 3 things today about how I see the power of networks. And I'll share some short stories with each of those 3 things. But I've really seen how networks are nimble. Especially through COVID, we saw the nimbleness of our network is really critical. So for example, Slow Food East Bay, one of our chapters in California, was able to pivot during COVID to create a CSA. And they created direct connections between rural farmers who were left with excess produce and urban communities who were experiencing high demands, and they were able to distribute meals to urban centers from those rural farmers. So they were able to, that wasn't part of their agenda before, but because they were nimble, they were able to connect those dots and change that program. And I put a story in the chat about Slow Food East Bay. Networks also decentralize power. So especially in slow food, the ability of an individual volunteer to think of an idea and do a thing, just make it happen, is really important and exciting. And there's no overall person or structure saying, no, you can't do this, or yes, you have to do this. So for example, Slow Food Phoenix created the Blue Watermelon Project, started with one chef who had this idea to connect other chefs in the area with students in school to really integrate taste education and interactive programming into curriculum and everyday life. And I'll pop that story in here as well. The third thing is networks have permeable borders. So they can expand and contract, right? And bring in new people as the topic relates to other people. So we just wrapped up the Slow Seed Summit. It was a global summit all about seeds and the commons. You know, this started with a conversation about how seed is life, but we were able to make global connections from farmers in San Diego to seed activists in Ecuador to Uganda and Kenya about the privatization of seeds and how people are impacted in different ways with commodity crops and seeds. So it's a great, networks give this great way to broaden and expand and to really connect cross-culturally. I would also say because of these three things, the nimbleness, the decentralized power, and the permeable borders, networks are also really fluid and they sometimes feel chaotic. They sometimes feel like, oh my gosh, like who is in our network? What's active, what's not? And so we need to balance this kind of chaos with leadership and structure. And like Nicolas said, with relationships. And we like to think about, you know, how efficiency is the enemy of equity. Meaning, if you really want equity, you have to slow down and you have to build relationships. And so that's why I like having slow right in the name of our organization, Slow Food. It's about relationships. It's about communicating and connecting with each other. It's about aligning around values like joy and justice, good, clean, and fair. And then together, it's about producing, rallying around calls to action that unite us. So that's what I wanted to share for now about Slow Food. Thank you for listening.
Thanks, Anna. I love the real on the ground stories, and I can empathize a lot as Anna knows, because I've been active in the slow food movement for years, and I think Anna didn't share some of the amazing examples at the global level of how they bring people together physically, actually in the city that I'm living in at the moment too, pre-COVID at least. Just people from all different corners of the world and people that are real kind of local grassroots farmers and activists in a way that is just so powerful and meaningful. And I think there's so many great stories still for us to tell. Emmanuel, it's going to be over to you. And as you're starting, just also a reminder to the speakers to formulate some, I think, reflections as well as questions for each other based on what you've been noticing about how your ideas might fit with each other, but also how a lot of this work is very new and very challenging. So I think it'll be really curious to talk about how the different issues and challenges and questions that you're all having in all of this work, and for us to be honest with each other. So, but before we get to that point, to you, Emmanuel, to share your experiences as well.
Yeah, thank you. First, do you see my slides? And hope you can hear me well.
Yep.
Yes, perfect.
Okay, great. So my name is Emmanuel or Kalany. I'm from Uganda, working with the regional universities for building agriculture, shortly known as ReForum. And my role is I actually coordinate partnerships and development, that is program and projects development in the network. I think I am the most relevant person in this conversation. I'm trying to move my slides. I don't know if you can see them.
We can, but just keep talking. Maybe they'll catch up. If you want to try turning up your video as well. So, but it's more important what you're saying. So we'll listen deeply, even if the slides don't move.
Yeah, I think let me just use the. Let me not put it on PowerPoint in presentation mode, so I can just speak to it. So briefly about ReForum is that arena of now 148 universities across 38 African countries. It started way back in 2004 by 10 vice chancellors from universities in Kenya, Uganda, Malawi, Zimbabwe, and Mozambique. And these 10 vice chancellors were participating in a time funded by the Rockefeller Foundation. And that when that program wound up, it was called Forum for Crop Husbandry. So the vice chancellors thought that it was very successful and they needed to carry on the achievements that came out of that program. So in 18 years, we've grown to 148 universities. So you can see where the brown colors, those are the countries where we work in, and our secretariat is based in Kampala in Uganda. Now, why was that work formed? So ReForum, as I said, is a network of universities, and it was formed to provide a platform for networking, resource mobilization, and advocacy among African universities to transform them to be relevant towards inclusive sustainable development. And that was more focused on the agricultural sector. And the whole idea behind it was different universities were at different capacity levels and needed to use, and those capacities were either in infrastructure, human resources, equipment. So those could be used to support one another across the continent and have economies of scope and scale. And more specifically, the idea was to help the universities to train quality graduates in the agricultural sector to facilitate development. A few areas that we started with from just pure training in agriculture at master's level, we have evolved to 6 different areas to support, including supporting bachelor students, entrepreneurship, technical and vocational education and training, master's training, PhD and postdoctoral training, and then research for development through graduate research grants. Now, the whole idea was to create this network or a partnership of universities across the continent that will support one another to achieve the desired output or desired change that we needed in the agricultural sector. Now, a lot happened, and because I have very limited time, one thing that we have seen as a great change is we have been able to train over 2,000 master's students, over 600 PhDs, and 200 undergraduates. We've also mobilized funds for research and development in the agricultural sector of over $200 million US. Now, that is the power of the network. Now, just a few seconds, I know my 4 minutes are finished. The biggest challenge we saw, we see this as a great opportunity because within 18 years, the demand for growth has been immense. We receive requests for membership every year and we have to turn them down. Now, the challenge we see is that each member comes with their own needs, their own demands, both at institutional, which is the university level, and at individual, which is either a faculty, students, the alumni, the entrepreneurs. So managing these great diverse demands makes managing the network a real nightmare. And lastly, our challenge, which I see that we're going to get a solution from the ENACT Festival, is that we needed to to measure the impact of the network, both in terms of its functioning and how it is satisfying members. So let me end here. Thank you.
Thanks, Emmanuel. And I think that the measuring impact piece as well is a session that you sort of just facilitated. Emmanuel, if you'd be able to unshare your screen, thank you. You sort of just facilitated as part of an ENACT session 2 hours ago, and there will be a recording. So for anybody who's trying to figure that out as well, we had some great people sharing some practical examples of how to do it. I think what we're going to do is actually jump right into listening to a bit from the audience. And then that'll give us a bit more time for the panelists to have a bit of dialogue with each other, building on each other's comments, but also building on your comments as the audience. So if you've already typed something, then you sort of now, yeah, okay, now we can tell them to click enter. So yeah, go ahead, just click enter. If you already typed something, if not, just start typing. And what we're asking you to do is to just, again, reflect on that big question, but just in general, things that you've heard that you, that I think, what should we say, that that resonate with you, or questions that are coming up for you. I'm going to put on some background music, and so we'll wait for some comments and questions to come in, and the panelists will unspotlight them, and they'll just spend some time watching and listening and reading to what you're saying, as your comments come in, and then we will move back to the panelists to reflect on what they're hearing. And since we're going to kind of be all here in gallery view, if you want to turn on your video so we can see you as you're typing, we would love that. So again, type any questions or comments or reflections you have, either on this big question, which I'll repost, or on anything that you've heard so far that really resonated with you, or challenges you're facing in your own kind of work around networks or sustainable agriculture. And meanwhile, enjoy the music. I'm gonna leave about 1 more minute. And panelists also, you're welcome to ask questions to each other. Thanks, Anna, for starting that off. So you can reflect and listen to each other's thoughts. If you're still typing questions, don't worry, because we'll allow them to keep coming in, but I'll invite the panelists to come back in about a minute. So I'm gonna turn down the music, and thanks for those who put in comments. If you're still thinking of things that you want to share, go ahead and type them in. And I'm just gonna ask Anna, Nicolas, Emmanuel, and Patrick to all four unmute yourselves and have a bit of a conversation with each other. Reflect on questions that you have, questions that others had, or any other comments that you have. And you're gonna have about 15 minutes just to talk, as if we're sitting at a dinner table. I like to call it a dinner table dialogue. Argue with each other, interrupt each other. Maybe, you're all unmuted. Okay, so whoever wants to jump in first.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe I can start here. My critical issue, as I'd mentioned, is the measurement of both the functionality and the impact of networks. And I think Nicolas had mentioned some things that, some work that you had done. I'd be very happy to hear how that can be translated from a project or program level to institutional long-term networks like ours, and I guess for Anna as well.
Ooh, good question. Measuring performance, impact, outcome, all those things is a very complex one, and we're all struggling with it. And I think what we're trying to do now at UNDP is having fit for purpose M&E system. When you think about system change and system transformation or network or collaboration, that are less linear. And in the development sector, the institutions I work with, it's a very linear system and approach to M&E. So we're looking at, bringing much more stories and qualitative information into it. But if I come back to the point I made about relationship, it's very interesting because a donor that gives funding to UNDP will not see trusted relationship as impact. They will not see that if you build trust and you build relationship, you are moving the needle towards system change transformation. No, they want to see, reduce deforestation, food systems that are not broken anymore, sustainability everywhere, reduce CO2 emissions. So which we need, but I think it's what comes in between. So we're trying to unpack what we call those signals of change, which are coming much at the early stage, that then gives you an understanding that you're moving in the right direction. But measuring that, the donor we're working with, it's not yet there. I'll stop here.
Yeah, it's really hard to measure trust, right? How do you measure a relationship? Like, oh, we texted 3 times this month. It's hard to put a number on that. And sometimes I think that even that expectation is a little capitalistic of trying to quantify a relationship. So a lot of what we're doing is trying to highlight the importance of ties and think about mapping and how we can show the different connections at different points of our network.
Yeah, thanks, Anna. I'm sorry for jumping in. I'm feeling like this could be a good platform for us to emphasize the establishment of trust, or the power of functioning networks as foundational, especially for sustainability. So my question is, how do we start to advance that as a discourse in the a narrative that we should sort of advocate for in the development discourse, so that someone who is giving the money should know that measuring or indicating establishment of trust is a good step towards sustainable development. I don't know, that's something that randomly came to my mind.
Yeah, a lot of people are working on that. And for example, in our organization, we have a quarterly theme where we build capacity around the theme, and there's like masterclass and micro practice and different things about leadership development. And this quarter is trust. And so we share articles, we share experience, we share case studies. But I think also it's like, sometimes you don't have to tell it. I think it's important also to say that you're not going to say to a group of stakeholders or community, we're going to build your capacity or we're going to do, no, it's through the action, through the process that you facilitate, that trust comes as part of the action, as part of the doing things together. And so sometimes you don't need to be telling it that it's not about trust, you know what I mean? It's like, it's about the action, and then together with the action, you build trust. I don't know, I'm a bit complex here, but yeah.
But you're right, Emmanuel, like in philanthropy, how do we change that conversation so people are focused more on the relationship and less on the output necessarily? And I put in the chat an organization, kind of a movement that I'm a fan of. I think they're mostly US, but it's called Communitycentric Fundraising. And the idea of turning away from donor-centric fundraising into really focusing on the community and more on relationships and less on kind of these externalities, outputs.
For me,
I had a question for Anna. I was kind of jealous to hear your story, which I found amazing, because you guys have a lot of agility, you know, in the way you do, you know, that's really something you emphasize, and that's something that we don't have, you know, like because of the institution. And, you know, I really like, I want to thank the organizer, because you have a lot of diversity of networks being presented. And I think that's the beauty of it, because we're working at very different level, you know, like very grassroots and institution and research institution and United Nations. And I was very interested to hear, because we're trying so much to bring agility into what we do, and we have so much constraints. So we have a lot to learn from you on agility. I just wanted to flag it.
Yeah, it always makes something new happening. Like someone will come into the network saying, I'm really passionate about sustainable fishing. And okay, there's a group of people over here, and then like we start really thinking about sustainable fishing. So it gives a lot of excitement and energy. But like I said, at the same time, it's really hard to have that big like 5-year vision strategic plan, because you're kind of like over agile sometimes, you know. And so we've done things like we have a national statute, we have a code of conduct, you know, to try to add some like governance standards, conflict resolution, mediation standards to that network. But it definitely keeps me on my toes, can I say?
I think that the question that resonated most for me is this question of we're working in hierarchical structures, and so how can we make sure the articulation between much more nimble networks and ad hoc constellations of actors can be articulated. That is really a big issue. So one of the themes that we still have quite a lot of discussions on that, because of course, as you know, the donor community likes to think in terms of outcomes, outputs, activities, and all the rest. So you would try to rephrase this in, I mean, trying to set up a process of co-design, of co-creation, of what the future could look like, and then agreeing on that, and then maybe trying to sort out what are the pathways towards that new future imagined. So you have to engage with these actors in kind of foresighting work, very simple, but still trying to imagine a bit what would be an alternative future and what would be a pathway towards this. I mean, we are working, of course, at a level that we want to have scale effects. So, I mean, the whole purpose of doing these assessments is to bring together decision makers to some extent, you know, having people that can change things, and then do and help them to make these decisions in a very strategic way. So that means you have to have all the insights and understanding of how systems work and how systems can be changed before you can do that. So yes, it's not only about consultations, but it's more about creating the basis, the substance, the substrate, to be able to create these long-term change processes, and because otherwise you will just do flashes of innovation and so on. But the whole question is about changing the regime that that generated the actual system to move to another system and another regime in a way. So this kind of long-term transformation processes, this is for me the challenge. And then the other challenge is, of course, how you can use networks to contribute to that. But I see it, yeah, that's maybe the problem statement as I feel it.
Patrick, I wonder, sorry, just a follow-up question to Patrick. I love that you're, working with decision makers, and I wonder what mechanisms you have in place to connect decision makers with those impacted by the decisions, with the farmers, with the people more at the grassroots level.
That's why you have to have a very broad stakeholder network. I mean, having farm organizations on the table, consumer organizations, representatives of the private sector, but not only representative, really actors that are champions in their own right to be able to become actors for change. That is the whole idea. But you go to that very progressively in a way, because you cannot have you can have these conversations, you have a selected number of conversations, then you progressively, as you zoom in into certain issues, you can have broader conversations with those people who really are acting or are essential actors in this process. So you do a mapping of actors, you try to understand what are their interests, what drives them, and so on. You really do a strategic planning, political economy analysis to be able then to move to a shared intervention strategy and a shared intervention structure and architecture to create that change process. So it's very long. That's why, I mean, I see networks as something that is very good in starting this process, but then somehow you need along the road to structure the whole thing. And that is something that, that we're trying to work on. So transforming a system will take you 10, 15 years. And that is the long run that you have to be prepared to invest in.
Yeah, thanks. And I found what Patrick is saying very interesting, based on our experience. As I said, we're a network of universities, but one thing we realize that we are working in this broader ecosystem of the agricultural sector. So the idea then we had to move towards is that first, as a network of universities, we have to satisfy our primary stakeholders. So to know what they are interested in. So professors, for example, will be interested in new knowledge, funding opportunities for research, and then money for research. So we had to create that environment where they can come together, access this, and that sort of kept the things working and everyone interested. But Brendan's question about how we can become sustainable in the post-COVID-19, okay, now in my world, it's post, I'm thinking that way, COVID is still there. But what we realized was that there was a need to move beyond ourselves as universities and create a linkage with other actors. Now, as Patrick was dealing, let's say, at national level, we actually decided to go continental. So we realized that we need private sector, we need policymakers, we need farmers themselves. So in all the activities that we do, in design and implementation, for example, for training, we try to create a partnership between universities and the host communities where you're likely to after you graduate, so that you gain the right skills and qualities. And the same for research. All our projects that we fund for research for universities are designed to make sure that they integrate the different actors in the agricultural, let's say in this case, the food system. But also what we realize that to reach scale, we need to document, provide a platform for where innovations, best practices are shared, both physically and virtually. So we have a knowledge management system, and then also provide a platform where these people meet, all the stakeholders we work with meet on annual basis to discuss with each other and see how best to work together. And so this knowledge platform, we have a knowledge repository, documents these innovation, but it has to be fit to, in a format that is fit for use by the different stakeholders, academics, farmers, private companies. And then we also try to create communities of practice where, let's say, the agri-entrepreneurs work together. They share what they believe and they share lessons and practices and support one another. The same for professors, the same for students. And now we started the alumni again, thanks for the support from InHive. We now started the alumni network where we are engaging them to work together. So we thought that this approach might help to create impact at scale in the sector.
Thanks, Emmanuel. I'm going to invite Anna to share a closing comment. I asked her in chat, but before I do, as you sort of noted, I can't believe the time is gone already. It went so fast. If anybody wants to share in chat, either some connections that your contact information, if you'd like to connect with each other, or also anything that motivated you or inspired you about what you've heard so far that you might want to take forward in yourself. We like to end with a bit of kind of looking forward piece, because as we have all of this here written, this festival is about creating spaces for behavioral change, new ways of thinking, new connections, new collaborations. And so we encourage you to check out the links that we shared in chat in the festival and everything that's going on around this. But I think just as a nice way to close, Anna, I know Slow Food's been doing this stuff for 25 years, and I think it'd be nice just to hear in 30 seconds, what transformational change you have seen and how you've seen power structures shift through the slow food movement.
30 seconds is a real challenge, Brendan, for something I have a lot to say about. But, you know, Slow Food was founded in Italy by Italians. And I think what we've seen over the last 30 years is a shift in power from being a Eurocentric network to being a network really driven by the global South. And, you know, leadership is soon transitioning to a Ugandan leader, Eddie Buchibi, as well as a young European, Marta Mesa. And I think that's a really encouraging shift. But in all of this, we have to recognize the impacts of colonialization. We have to recognize the impacts of slavery on our food systems. And I think historically, at least in the United States, that's kind of been a missing part of the conversation. So I'm excited to see, like, as the power shifts within the Slow Food Network and within our food systems, how can we really rely on the expertise and leadership of our friends and colleagues who are in the global South. So I'll end with that.
Thanks, and that's perfect. We like to ask before we close, there's so much more that we can say, and I'm hoping that this will be the start of multiple conversations, of multiple collaborations. Our whole idea is to start thinking about more deeply and doing more action that's actually bringing together different network approaches around different sectors. And so we will be following up with all of you on that. But just to close now, one, I want to give a big thanks to Anna, Nicolas, Patrick, Emmanuel for sharing your stories and for taking your time. And very simply, we like to always close with just an easy way, rather than just clicking the exit button from Zoom, just unmuting yourself and saying bye or saying thanks, and then leaving us. So I invite you all to do that.